In this problem, we solve a quadratic equation. We solve the equation 10 equals 4x plus x squared. To begin with, I subtract 10 from both sides in order to get 0 on one side. While I do that, I'm also going to reorder my terms so that my x squared term is first, writing them in descending order. So I have x squared plus 4x minus 10. The next thing I would do would be attempt to factor. I don't see a way to factor this. In fact, there isn't one. Even if there was one and I didn't see it, I could still use the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. And it's a good idea to write this down so that you substitute correctly. We now need to determine a, b, and c. A is the coefficient of the x squared term, which in this case is 1, since 1 times x squared is x squared. B is the coefficient of the x term, which would be 4. And c is the constant term, which is negative 10. I now substitute. I have x equals the opposite of b, which is the opposite of 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which would be 4 squared, minus 4 times 1 times negative 10. That's substituting 1 for a and negative 10 for c, all over 2 times a, or 2 times 1. And now what's left is simplifying. We have x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 4 times 1 times negative 10 is negative 40, all over 2 times 1, which is 2. That's the same thing as x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 plus 40 all over 2, or x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 56 over 2. When I get to this point, I need to ask myself, is there any way I can simplify the square root of 56? 56 does have a perfect square factor, so I can simplify. So what I do is I factor 56, and I'm going to factor 56 as 4 times 14. And then I can factor the square root of 4 times 14 as the square root of 4 times the square root of 14. And that means I have negative 4 plus or minus, the square root of 4 is 2, 2 times the square root of 14 over 2. So I have simplified the square root of 56. Now I can also do a little more simplification. I can factor a 2 out of my numerator. I can write it like this. X equals 2 times, I factor a 2 out of the negative 4. That gives me a negative 2. I can go ahead and write my plus or minus. Then I factor a 2 out of 2 times the square root of 14, which leaves me with the square root of 14. And all that's written over 2. Now what that does for me is I have now 2 over 2. 2 is a factor in the numerator, and you can think of this as 2 times 1 if you need to. It's a factor in the denominator. So I can cancel the 2's, factor out a 2 over 2, which is 1, either way you want to think of it. And I'm left with x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 14. And so I can say then that the solutions are negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 14.